Hi you guys, I'm getting ready to start on chapter 3. This chapter is called Let's Hear It for the First Grade. When I first started school, I could read on a second grade level, and it was suggested that I be put in that grade. I was as big as most second graders too. My first grade teacher, Miss Dworkin, said that it was a very bad idea. He can read on the second grade level, but he can't speak well enough to be in the second grade. I didn't know what she meant by that because I thought I spoke perfectly well. But I liked Mrs. Dworkin. She was a hugger, and whenever you did something good in her class, it ended up with her pulling you close and telling you just how good you were. I was in no hurry to leave her class. We used a thick white paste to glue leaves and picture cutouts onto heavy construction paper. My only trouble in the first grade came when I accidentally dumped a jar of the paste onto my lap. A boy laughed, and I took some of the paste from my lap and put it on Mrs. Dworkin. Miss Dworkin made me stand in a corner for almost an hour. Despite the accident, I love PS 125 and I love school. It was a place where I could meet a lot of other kids my age, play games, and listen to the stories that Miss Dworkin would read to us. It wasn't until I reached the second grade that I realized I had a speech problem. Dabba dabba dabba. Manuel Bonilla taunted me, standing inches from my face and mimicking my poor speech as the rest of the class watched. Dabba dabba dabba. Manuel stopped the dabba 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 when I hit him in the face. Mrs. Bauer, our second grade teacher, came into the room. The class was standing around Manuel, who still lay on the floor. Is he dead? Someone asked. Of course, Manuel wasn't anywhere near dead, but that didn't stop Mrs. Bauer from sending me directly to the principal's office. Again. Actually, I liked the principal's office. It was interesting to see the teachers come and go, talking about what they had for lunch or what they had done the night before, just as if they were normal people. I liked Mrs. Flynn, the principal, too. She was a tall, elegant woman who had a way of talking to pupils that made you feel good about yourself, even when you were being punished. My punishment on this occasion was to write 500 times, I will never, never hit any student in Public School 125. Public School 125 on LaSalle Street had once been a police station. There were rumors of cells in the basement where the souls of dead prisoners who had died in jail, howled all night. Being put down there would have been bad, and writing anything was much easier. What jail meant to me at the time was that you had to get some money together to get out. My father's brother, Leroy, called Lee, was in jail, and my father was constantly getting letters from lawmakers asking for money for Uncle Lee's case. I discovered that Uncle Lee had been in jail longer than I had been alive. The one truly bad thing about being punished in the principal's office was that whenever Mrs. Bauer was upset, she'd stop teaching and read to us. She was in the middle of reading Little House in the Big Woods, and I was going to miss her reading because I was in the principal's office. I imagined Laura in the small cabin, and all kinds of bears and creepy things just feet from the front floor, waiting to get in. Mrs. Bauer had shown us a picture of Indians. They were half naked, dark, and scowling. All the images of Mama as an Indian, all the images of Indians I had seen were negative. I never thought of Mama as Indian, but I did worry about her father. Go to your class and ask for your homework assignment, Mrs. Flynn said. You have to do your homework plus the 500 times. I went to class just before school was let out. Mrs. Bauer said you were terrible, a boy informed me. I didn't think I was terrible and gave him a good kick under the desk to emphasize the point. At home, Mama asked me how school had been, and I told her it had been just fine. The first thing I did was to write all the numbers down from 1 to 500 in my notebook. I didn't believe how many pages it was going to take. Then I took a ruler and made a straight line down the left-hand side of my page. That straight line was going to be my I for each of the 500 times, but when I wrote out the first I will never, never, I learned that I couldn't fit the sentence on one line. Life was not fair. We had moved from 126th Street. Morningside Avenue, where our apartment was located, was wide and beautiful. There were apartments on one side of the avenue and Morningside Park on the other. The park, I would later learn, was the western edge of Harlem. On the far side of the park were the Columbia University complex, Grant's Tomb, and Riverside Church, all places I would come to know over the following years. The building we lived in was a 5-floor walk-up. We lived on the 4th floor. At the top of each landing, there was a gaslight fixture that was no longer being used now that the building was wired for electricity. The entrance hall was wide, with the tile floor. The first stairway consisted of about 9 steps, a sharp turn, and then 7 more steps to the landing on the 2nd floor. When you were being chased, that turn always gave you an extra second to escape. We lived between 121st and 122nd Streets, just 3 blocks from 125th Street, Harlem's main thoroughfare. On the corner at 122nd Street was the Church of the Master, a fairly large Presbyterian church in which I would spend much of my early life. The church had a great old organ, with pipes that went from behind the organ to a point high overhead. The building next to the main part of the church had a gym and a stage. The ceiling in the gym was low, and you could tell which kid had learned to play basketball there by his flat jump shot. My own apartment was, I believe, originally designed as a 1-bedroom flat with a dining room, kitchen and living room, and nursery. 5 of us moved into the apartment 4S, and Mom was thrilled with the spaciousness of arrangements. As many as 10 or 11 people lived in some of the apartments, but most only had 4 to 6. The apartments weren't designed for that many, but that was what Harlem was about, working people doing the best they could. 2nd grade was most notable in my mind for the adventures of Laura, but we had also had World War II. The kids all brought newspapers to school and once a month, cans of food. My father was drafted into the Navy and Mom and my sisters all got jobs in the garment industry. It was decided that I was old enough not to have a babysitter after school, and I was given my own house key. "You're a big boy now," Mama said. "Make sure you lock the doors when you go out and be sure to turn off the lights." I was a big boy. At age 8, I was bigger than most of my classmates and nearly as tall as Mama, who stood barely over 5 feet. In Bible school, which I attended summers at the Church of the Master, I had learned to weave a lanyard out of plastic strips. There was a clip at the end of the lanyard, and onto this I hooked the ring. Almost all the kids in the neighborhood with working parents had their keys around their necks in either strings or plastic chains made in Bible school. Having my own house key was absolutely magnificent for 2 reasons. The first had to do with the grown-up feeling I got by unlocking and locking the door. The second reason had to do with Mr. Dodson, the Wicked Witch of West Harlem. This woman worked very hard to ruin my life. "Mrs. Dean, you shouldn't let that boy play with guns," she had announced the year before. She'd seen me chasing a friend down 121st Street, my Lone Ranger cat pistol blazing, and cornering him in front of 72 Morningside Avenue, the home of the Wicked Witch of West Harlem, before he could reckon his Red Ryder carbine. Mama considered Mrs. Dodson an educated Negro and someone to whom she should listen. My cat pistol was taken from me and, despite my tears, put out with the garbage. The next thing upon which Mrs. Dodson cast her evil eye was comic books. "Their roadmap to the jailhouse," she said. I was told I could no longer bring comic books to the house. The Wicked Witch said that one day I would thank her for saving me. She didn't know me very well, and obviously she did not know about my next-door neighbor, Ralph Williams, also known as Ruffy. Ruffy had more comic books than anyone else in the whole world. He was 3 years older than me, and we barely spoke. But once a month, he discarded a small stack of comic books, sometimes as many as 15, and at times even twice that number. There they'd be, sitting in a neat pile outside his door, waiting for the super to pick them up and take them down to the basement. As soon as I got the house keys, I knew that I had found a way to get those comics into the house. I had to find a way to get those comics into the house. I took them in immediately if Mom wasn't home. If Mom was home, I'd take the comics down to the first floor and hide them far underneath the stairs. Then, when Mama was safely off to work, I'd sneak down and get them. Unlike Ruffy, I saved my comics. Once I heard Mama tell a neighbor that I didn't read comics, but I knew I had close to 200 tucked safely away under my bed. I read well and I knew it, despite the fact that I never got the best marks in reading class. It seemed that whenever I got a C or a D in conduct, which was usual, it would drag down all my other marks as well. What I read away from school was comic books, as many as Ruffy could afford. The idea that the comics were forbidden added to their appeal. They could also be reread and traded, and I was known as the comic book king of my set. The radio serials were like an extension of the comics, and Mama liked to listen to them with me. In school, I started speech therapy. Once a week, a speech therapist would come to school and work with students who had speech problems, and I was considered one of those who had problems. The therapist kept trying to get me to pronounce my words clearly, but I apparently did not. The trouble was that, to me, the words seemed clear. I found it frustrating when a teacher would ask me to repeat a phrase over and over, or when a teacher said that I did not know a word because it didn't pronounce it correctly. There were things I was good at in school, such as reading and spelling, but it seemed to me that my speech somehow became more important than anything else. I became very angry if kids laughed at my speech, or even if I thought they were laughing. My very first instinct would be to yell at them, quickly followed by punching them. Near the end of the school year in 3rd grade, I slapped a kid, and my teacher, Mrs. Ace, slapped me. She slapped me at least once a day for the next week of school days until Dorothy Dodson, the daughter of a wicked witch, told my mother, who went to the school and told the teacher never to hit me again. Miss Ice didn't hit me again, but she failed me in reading, math, conduct, and everything else except gym and attendance. My report card was a bright mess of red marks and circled grades. I even received a C in reading. The one sure thing that would produce a beating in my house was a report card with a red mark in conduct. Conduct, by the way, is like behavior. The idea that the teacher didn't like me and did not count as far as conduct was concerned. I was beaten that night and told that over the summer I would have to relearn all the lessons in which I had done poorly. Mama, the one doing the beating, was really mad and threatened even more punishment. I didn't mind her threats because she never stayed mad. And as my sister Jerry pointed out, I had been promoted to the 4th grade. There you have it for 2nd and 3rd grade for Mr. Walter.